to The Thriving Mama, the podcast that teaches you not just how to survive, but to thrive in motherhood. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie Davis. Nothing really exemplifies the Western world's disconnectedness more than the world environment. And I believe it's a fundamental key to why so many of us are struggling now. This seems weird, but I'll explain why. In indigenous cultures, there is no word for environment because they view mankind as an integral part of nature and not as a distinct or separate entity. This oneness is a significant part of their approach to life, living in harmony and equality with nature and using her resources with respect. In the Western world, we talk about getting out into nature with practices such as forest bathing or grounding for health benefits. But indigenous cultures have long known that the key to health is maintaining the connection with nature in as many ways as possible. It is believed that our decreased connection with nature in the last 30 to 40 years has had a profound effect on our physical, mental, and emotional health. Today, I'm going to discuss with Dr. Maya Shetreat another powerful yet subtle way to incorporate the healing power of nature into your life with the use of master plant drops, how to use them, and how they've transformed the lives of her clients and family. I'll also share my own personal experiences using them with myself, my family, and my clients. I'm beyond excited to introduce my friend, colleague, and mentor, Dr. Maya Shetreat. This really is going to be a very special episode. Maya Shetreat is a neurologist, herbalist, urban farmer, ceremonialist, and the author of The Dirt Cure and the newly released Master Plant Experience. She has been featured in the New York Times, The Telegraph, NPR, Sky News, The Dr. Oz Show, and more. Dr. Maya created Quantum Drops, a vibrational master plant product that is safe, legal, and deeply transformative. She is also the founder of the Terrain Institute, where she offers a training for psychedelic informed practitioners, as well as the upcoming quantum practitioner certification. You can find her at drmaya.com, quantumdrops.com, and you can also access the first chapter of her book, The Master Plan Experience, through a link we'll put in the show notes. Also, if you're interested in learning more about the drops or purchasing them, you will also find a link in the show notes there. I've launched this podcast to share my knowledge and experience, but I know that real change comes from action and not just information. For personalized guidance, I'm offering podcast listeners a free 20-minute Thriving Mama Glow assessment call. We'll evaluate your situation, and even if I'm not the right fit for you, I'll provide useful resources and support to help you on your journey. You'll find that link in the show notes as well. Hey, everybody. I'm so excited to have Dr. Maya here today. She's such an inspiring person on so many levels to me personally, and I know so many of our colleagues. And I'm just so grateful that you're here today with us.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
And just so everybody knows a little bit of background, Maya and I have both been in the kind of, I'd say, functional medicine / healing space for a long time. And both of our journeys have evolved from just functional medicine to other things. And so I've actually done her certification program, which is now a decertification program, which I think is super cool. But yeah, we have a history, and I just think she's an amazing human being. So that is why I wanted to have her on here and have her share all of her knowledge and her story and her experience, because it really is something that we need in the world right now. So like I said, Maya has such an amazing background. And I feel like one of the reasons that like you as a human being and your work have always resonated with me is that we both are people who tend not to follow the crowd, and we don't conform, and we tend to push boundaries. And so I would love for you to share your journey both as a practitioner and as a mom, so you can lay the land, but also because those two stories are so intertwined for you.
Yeah, for sure. Like I would say everything for me is the spiritual journey, and motherhood and my professional journey as it has unfolded definitely are kind of two sides of the same coin. And yeah, I mean, I think, gosh, how did this journey happen? But to begin with, I would say, you said that we haven't followed the kind of prescribed path, right? And I would say, this is kind of, it's the blessing and the curse, right? Like I've been like that since always. And as a kid, it's not an easy thing for parents. It's not an easy thing for teachers. It's not an easy thing for you as the kid right? In terms of even fitting in and other things like that. And you kind of think, oh, like, well, when I get older, whatever, I'm going to do X, Y, Z. And then of course, that same way, that same lens of looking at the world and seeing kind of through the bullshit, I'll just kind of shorten it to that. It's not welcome actually in a lot of places, and least of all in medicine where, my questions, and I wasn't, there are people who ask questions kind of to be a jerk and ask jerky questions. And I was not someone who was like trying to ask questions to get people revved up. I was really curious, like, why does everyone who have neurologic issues seem to also have immunologic issues? Oh my God, like the blowout from questions that I asked just absolutely turned people upside down, made them upset. I was not even realizing that I was asking questions that were really getting at the underpinnings of the incongruities of the medical thinking, perspective, establishment, right? All of that. So, people could see that I was a thoughtful person. I was a considerate person. I was a hardworking person, but then also I was very disruptive. And obviously I was also a mom throughout my training. So I had one baby in med school, one baby in residency, and one baby in my neurology fellowship, which obviously was also totally not supported and kind of like taboo and stigmatized to be a mom that cared about being a mom at the same time that I was a trainee, right? A medical trainee in any capacity, because you're supposed to kind of give your life to being, a trainee only. So that's just like was the kind of foundation of my journey. And then when I had my third child, my youngest, who's my son, now 18 years old, 6'2" in his freshman year of college, at a year of age, he had what looked like asthma and developmental plateau, or even I would say a regression. And I'm a pediatric neurology, fellow at that time. And nobody really took me seriously, just as if I was any mom who comes and says, I'm worried about my child and I'm right. No, oh, he's just allergic. He had hives all over all the time. Oh, he's just, like all of these things. He seems okay. Right. And I knew he was not. So that journey of finding out he was allergic to soy, but after going to lots of doctors, including colleagues, being called a hysterical mom, all of this stuff, being an MD did not inure me from any of those experiences, actually, which was shocking to me at the time. I thought, well, at least, right, I should know. If you're a woman, if you're a mom, you automatically get put into this bucket and get, kind of denigrated and all of the things that probably many of the moms listening, have experienced in some capacity or another, or hopefully not. But I went through that and I ended up having to be the one to go into the medical literature and to do the things I'd been taught to do and really put together, right? At that time, no one was talking about the gut-brain connection. It was in the scientific literature, but only the most fringe people were talking about like the gut brain or leaky gut. I mean, those people were like the, snake oil salesman as far as everyone else.
Right. I remember that was like when I entered into functional medicine, it was exactly 18 years ago. And I remember that. I totally remember that. It was like snake oil.
Yeah. It was really, and like the term leaky gut, of course, now, like we know it's true, they call it like gut permeability, instead, like, okay, fancy words and, make it sound more scientific. But all of that to say, I thankfully, after 10 months of really not finding answers, ended up finding that food was making this huge impact, that a food that my son was allergic to, he had been dairy sensitive, had him on soy milk at that point, and he was getting soy every single day. And when, I finally found not the best allergist, the one who was very like diminishing of me, but a community allergist who was like, yeah, let's just test him. He came up with a huge welt for soy. And I'm like, oh, so took him off of soy. And unless he had a dietary incursion, because of course soy is so sneaky and in everything, he never had asthma again and he started, developing again. It took time to get him back on track, but it was such a seminal experience for me and brought out all that mama bear energy and like all of the, how do I recover him? How do I translate this to my patient population, which was filled with kids with autism, and ADHD and seizures and migraines and, oppositional defiant disorder and all of the things, and I'm thinking, well, food is actually super important because it affects the immune system, just like I always had thought. And I wanted to do research into that. And of course, was totally discouraged to doing any dietary research. By experience, I wouldn't even give the most experienced researcher this kind of project to look at diet and behavior, So it was an interesting journey, but that took me to writing my book, The Dirt Cure. And then, a number of years later, I actually had a whole mold experience in my apartment, which probably was the reason, in fact, that my son had the food allergies, but it grew and grew and grew. And over the years, so my son was 6 years old and started to have all these symptoms again, not asthma, but other stuff, wacky, weird, Finally, we moved out for 5 months to have a whole very deep mold remediation, got the bathroom to the studs, the whole deal. And we moved back in. Everything's been tested. All the upholstered furniture has been eliminated. Everything, we're sitting on folding chairs. Whatever. And 2 weeks into that, my youngest, again, had a seizure, a first-time seizure. And he was in the bathroom that had been the epicenter of the mold, but there was no mold. It had been gutted. There was nothing. We tested it. It had been cleaned with toothbrushes on the door, the frames. It was there was no mold. And he was already on the diet. He was already on the herbs. He was on the supplements. He was on all these things. And I was holding him, in that moment, because he'd been locked in the bathroom when this happened. And my other son had been peeking under the door, brothers, and said, he's lying on the floor and he's not moving. So I'm on the phone, run in there and we can't get the door open. Anyway, it was all sufficiently dramatic and horrifying. And I'm holding him when he finally came out. We did not have to break down the door. And I just knew with every cell in my body that this was not a physical problem. I was this is energetic, spiritual, soul. It is, we're doing everything physical. I was that person that they would have sent this kid to. Anyone would have said, there was no other pediatric neurologist really doing what I was doing at that time. And I was I don't know what to do. I don't know. And, I'll just pause for a second here and say those moments when you're totally taken out of everything everything you think everything you ever thought you knew, and you're just I don't know. Those are these incredible, they're torture, they're horrible, they're rock bottom, they're desperate, and they're the beginning of this beginner's mind kind of place where you are on a spiritual journey that it means you're in a new identity, right? That you're having a death experience, hopefully not a real death experience, but a kind of death, an identity death where you then are recalibrating your path. And that's what happened to me. And I was how am I going to find somebody who, at that time, I didn't know people. I knew the integrative medicine world, but I didn't know people who I thought were energy healers or spiritual healers that I would trust or that I knew who to talk to. So that took me on it was like a myth. You go to somebody, they turn you away, you go again, they turn you away. But all of that ended up taking me to Ecuador, where I was studying with a 4th generation shaman and PhD in ethnobotany. She was kind of had foot in both worlds. And, there I ended up I went to learn more about indigenous healing and using plants and candles and eggs and, all of these strategies that I was these are amazing and they work with us on a different level. And also, without telling us in advance, offered what we call master plants, a few experiences with ayahuasca and San Pedro cactus. And I would never have gone on this trip. I was a mother of young children. I'm a neurologist. Yes, I was into herbalism and I was into diet and all of that, but I would not have gone on a trip about psychedelics or anything like that. I know that's big in now. I would not have done it then, and I would not probably have done it now, but because of the way it happened, they didn't warn me at all. I ended up having this experience with the San Pedro cactus that was very seminal for me. And in fact, I've never drunk San Pedro since. And this was over a decade ago, because that journey was so seminal that I am still unpacking it to this day.
Wow. That's a lot. That's amazing. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm so glad you went into the detail and the depth that you did, because I think it highlights the journey. This is a journey. Life is a journey. Our health is a journey. And I think we live in a society where it's like, a pill for an ill, right? And, it's not going to work. That's never going to work, because, you have to get into the experience. You have to feel things. You have to think about what's happening. And then, like you said, sometimes your path shifts. And, most of the time in the moment, we're not excited about it or happy about it, but really it is a gift. When I talk to my patients about like their worst symptoms, I'm like, if you're, willing to accept this, you can see it as a gift, because really it's, your life and your body saying, I need help, and it's going to change who you are, and change your identity, just like you were talking about. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that part. And I wanted to ask this next question, because like you just touched on, you've had many iterations of your work, and it keeps evolving as you search for better tools to help people. So you kind of touched on what brought you to the master plants, but why now for the master plants?
Well, I'll first say just that part of the detail of, what I just shared is that I think, like you, a lot of people look to doctors and say, oh, they worked hard and they did these things and they got to this place. And, what I just want people to know, and this kind of leads into your next question, is there's no linear aspect to a journey professionally, personally. If you're doing life right, whatever right is, and I don't have any specifics around it other than to say there's a lot of ups, downs, sideways, upside downs, and forwards. Like it's not at all the linear thing that most of us were told. In fact, one of my friends that I was recently talking to said it's a labyrinth. Like you keep thinking you're getting closer, and then then you're like, oh, I'm so close. No, I'm going far, right? I say this because we live in this very, I'll say like masculine world. And what I mean by masculine is not male, because we all have masculine and feminine within us, but it's this like very young kind of like do kind of energy. Achievement and, how much money do you have? What do you do for a living? How big is your house? Like whatever, how much money do you, and that's so misleading. Stories people tell because of that framework, those stories are misleading. And it's so upsetting for so many people to say, well, those people are successful and I, am having all these ups, downs, sideways, upside downs, backwards and forwards. No. Everybody has that if they're really living life fully. And so why master plants, right? Why are these plants kind of coming to the forefront now? Well, there is this truthfulness that I think we're all starting to come up against about the society that we're living in. I want to say, some people will say, oh, it's so bad, capitalism or this, or, they'll have the medical system. I don't think there's any system that's a perfect system. And I don't think there's any society that's a perfect society, including indigenous society, which in many ways was quite a bit closer to what might be more ideal, but it was certainly not like, I can't hold that up and say, this is the ideal, right? Like, anyway, we can't go back to that. That's not happening. So what I would say is because this awakening and this awareness is kind of exponentially happening, it's overwhelming and we need support. And I want to say something. These kinds of changes have happened over the course of all human history. And this is why master plants and psychedelics actually have been around and worked with and honored and respected since the beginning of time. And we know this because there are literally cave drawings that have mushrooms, that have the cactus, that have DNA of these master plants, not in the opening of the cave where you'd think, oh, you're doing your daily, but in these deep recesses of caves. That's why we're still discovering them 20,000, 40,000 years later, where in these deep recesses where it's dark, where it's a little oxygen deprived, where it's totally private, where these ceremonies would happen. And these plants, these master plants, and we could talk more about what they are, they were there to help humans shift their consciousness and better navigate the human experience.
Amazing. So yes, you alluded to talking more about what they are. And so That's what I wanted you to get into next, is kind of what they are, what's your process of making them. And there's some, follow-up questions on that, but we can start there.
So master plants are, just as I said, they're called masters by Indigenous people. And I do not speak for Indigenous people, but simply am sharing this particular perspective that resonates for me very strongly. Master plants are masters, right? They're not psychedelics. They're not drugs. They're not compounds. They're not tools. They're masters. They're considered beings, wise beings that transmit ancient wisdom that help us, human beings who have not been here as long as plants. Actually, they are able to transmit wisdom in a way that humans can receive and shift. And master plants are not all psychedelics. Coffee is a master plant. The cacao plant is a master plant, right? Tobacco is a master plant. If you think about
all the ceremonial plants, right?
Well, they are. And in fact, they're also plants that people probably more commonly can feel their own longing around, right? Like the way people need their coffee, right? Or what people will do to get chocolate.
Yep. Right.
is pretty profound, but we know that these shift the way we feel and the way we think. And so while a master plant need not be psychedelic plants are always considered masters. And psychedelic plants could be ayahuasca, could be San Pedro cactus, could be the psilocybe mushrooms, the magic mushrooms, the amanitas, right? Those little red mushrooms with the white dots like we saw in the Smurfs. Totally dating myself maybe, but
I'm right there with you.
And salvia, oga, a lot of them. So all of this to say that what I ended up doing after having this really seminal experience in Ecuador was to start to grow these plants. And I didn't grow them because I wanted to consume them. I grew them because it felt like a service, right? One of the things, if you have a master that gifts you with their knowledge, right? A teacher or a master, from an Indigenous standpoint. And for me, it made perfect sense that there should be reciprocity, right? You're not going to just keep going back more. Teach me more, give me more, show me more. How can I be reciprocal? What's my offering? How do I show my gratitude and appreciation by growing these plants? And partly by bringing more ceremonial and sacred practice into my work. So I started to offer free ceremonies. I started to teach more about the spiritual path, right? As you know. And so one day as I'm tending these plants, and remember not consuming them, I get this really powerful message in words, which, is not always the case. But I heard, why do people think they need to consume us to experience our medicine? Show them another way. So that was years ago. And I'm thinking to myself, what? Right? I mean, I'm definitely an out of the box neurologist, but I'm a neurologist and I'm, I like homeopathy. I use it acutely in my practice and very occasionally constitutionally, but I'm not like a trained homeopath. And, I thought flower essences were really interesting and all of that. So I wasn't a foreigner to these ideas, but I knew this was different. And ultimately I noodled with it for a really long time and avoided it and resisted it and all of the things you do. And ultimately I started to experiment with ceremony and doing something ceremonial in partnership with my plants. So, my 10-year-old ayahuasca, my many San Pedro cacti, et cetera, working with them, they, gave me songs, these medicine songs, and they actually have their own music, these plants do, that you can measure because plants oscillate and you actually can translate that to music and a number of other ways, certain times of day and month and year that felt like the right times and created in ceremony this medicine. I mean, this tonic in a sense. And I started to work with it with people at my retreats or with patients sometimes, obviously with their consent, because to be honest, I have a bullshit detector that's pretty well developed and I'm already a doctor. Like I didn't need to go do this thing. I'm only going to do it if it's actually going to help people, right? Like I don't need to just go through the motions of creating something that no one understands. Like that's not, that's more need for that. I could just sell magnesium or something. It's a lot easier. So I started to work with it and people were having these very, very profound shifts in their lives. And there is this whole precedent, an indigenous precedent for vibrational medicine with these powerful plants, which is through one way anyway, is through Icaros, which in ayahuasca ceremonies, there are these songs that are sung, and they are not actually considered songs that are composed by anybody, but they are considered to be vibrational transmissions from the ayahuasca to the ayahuasquero, the maestro, the person who is leading the ceremony and transmitting these songs that were given to him or her. And they are medicine. And if you listen to them in a ceremony, they make you feel a certain kind of way. Like you might vomit when you hear it, cry when you hear it. You might start to calm down and feel like you're coming back into your body, depending on the Icaros that you're listening to. And these are considered to be as powerful, equal in power to the actual brew. And in some cases, ayahuasqueros will not give the brew. They drink the brew and will sing the Icaros and do the healings. And actually, that's considered the medicine and people get healed. So it's very beautiful. It's very different than how we think of pill for the ill, right? And compounds and receptors. And this is not how indigenous people who have been the custodians of these plants for millennia, especially as they've been stigmatized and, kind of pushed into the darkness, they don't think about things like receptors and neurotransmitters. And yet almost, let's say 80 to 90% of pharmaceuticals that we use in hospitals, in the OR, that we get prescribed were actually brought back from indigenous communities by bioprospectors, anthropologists, etc., that actually were then synthetically developed into pharmaceuticals, the popular, and when I'm talking about opioids, I'm talking about what, anesthesia. Like we're not talking, just some la-di-da thing.
So many of them. So many. Yeah.
And so what we know is that these indigenous communities, without having microscopes, without having PCR, without any of those things, were able to develop and understand. And if you go to the jungle, I just want to say, and I've been there are hundreds of thousands of plants that look very uninteresting in the context of the jungle, right? I mean, you do have these or those that are like, whoa, like beautiful. And then there's like a lot of green. And they know how to mix them, how to cook them, and they say how they learned that was the plants told them.
Yep. That's amazing. Love that so much. And so just so everybody knows what we're talking about, these are the plant essences that Maya makes, and they are the grandmother, the grandfather, and the children. I've been using a lot of the children lately. Past 3 weeks, a lot of the children. It's interesting how, just depending upon where you are and knowing what each one does, because I tend to just keep them faced away from me and pick whichever one is calling to me. But I lately have been deliberately going to the children because I feel like I need more of that energy with the heaviness of how everything has been, it's crazy. So when you are actually making the drops, how do you infuse the solution?
So it's made with song. It's made with light. It's made with an altar, certain crystals. They're charged and structured, charged water. And then we actually have a bottling facility and this was when I knew it was time to actually make them more available, was I met a very wonderful scientist who, consults for NASA and, has his own companies, and he likes to work with quantum technology. So he said, just like the other, he's like, well, I'm too busy to do anything like this. And then 8 or 9 months later, we talked again and he said, oh, I would love to help you with this. And he said, I know you're going to want an altar there, so I'm going to build you a table that'll just stay there all the time. Send me the altar. So I got this whole download of the altar. I built it. I numbered it, etc., sent it to him. And he actually put it out and said, oh, I changed it a little bit so that we could charge the water that we're putting in it on the altar. Like he was totally engaged, and he plays actually the plant songs when they bottle. So it's a very ceremonial process from beginning to end. And we call it ceremony in a bottle because that's where I think, people are like, oh, this is like homeopathy or this is like flower essences. And it's actually not. And it's not because I don't have the utmost respect for those methods. And it isn't totally different, but where it is different from homeopathy is homeopathy actually starts with plant matter or some matter. This does not take any of the plant. I mean, I understood what those plants said as, don't destroy me. Show how the medicine can be transmitted without hurting me or taking any part of me away, right? So the homeopathy piece didn't fit that. And then the essence part, it's more than an essence because it is made with ceremony. So there's that whole other co-creation happening that brings it to that level.
Yeah. And the energetics, all of the energetics and the vibration of that, the song, the ceremony, all of that. So I think that's a huge piece of the puzzle of, why they're so simple, but they're so powerful. So let's talk a little bit about, can you describe each one of them, the grandfather, the grandmother, and the children, and how you would typically use them?
So the grandmother is made with the ayahuasca vine. And again, when I say with, not from, right? And this is also, they're legal. They are safe. You can use them for children. You can use them for sober people, for pregnant women, for elders, medically fragile, psychiatrically fragile, right? All of those things. And that was really important to me. Also to not use alcohol in the making of it. So the preservative in it, there's a little bit of a preservative and it's organic vegetable-based glycol. So, and that's because glycerin's actually very often petroleum derived. We didn't want petroleum. I mean, I'm not against petroleum because it is of the earth, but also that was not what I wanted to be in this sacred tonic. So the ayahuasca is the grandmother. San Pedro is the grandfather, and the psilocybe mushrooms are the children, and they were called the Children's Saints by Maria Sabina. She's not the original, but she is the original for most of the global north and most of us who were connected to these mushrooms, back in the 1950s. So the grandmother is really this deep mother wound energy. It's also like strengthening the heart of the mother. It's kind of finding your identity in the lineage. What we see is a lot of like lineage healing. I could tell some interesting stories about that, but there is that whole also, being connected to all of the knowing of the divine feminine lineage. I think a lot of people who come through my course in particular, feel a lot of grief and express a lot of grief about the kind of knowing that's been lost in the witch hunts, in the kind of persecution of women, the sacred knowledge that we've lost, just the matriarchal passing down of knowledge and the kind of village support.
Oh, 100%. I remember in your course, that was probably the talk or lecture that we had that stood out the most, because I think every woman who was in there was so impacted by it, and tears. I mean, people cried. It was like, it is so emotional because we have lost so much of that in our modern time, in our modern world. And I think it is something to grieve for, because it's funny that you talk about the village, because that in my mind is what I'm trying to bring back. That is literally one of my goals, is to bring back the village of support for women, because that's why we're so, we're struggling and we're disconnected, because we don't have that anymore. And, we could go on about the connection to nature and what that involves in this whole thing too, but we won't. Yeah, I get that so much.
Well, and so what I want to say by way of reassurance, even though that grief is real and that loss is real in a practical way, but none of that knowledge is gone or is lost, because it's not actually something that's held by people. It's something that's held in a much more collective consciousness, and it exists in myth. It exists in the plants. It exists in the animals. It exists in this kind of transmission. And part of, what quantum drops offer, and the grandmother in particular, is that access to that bigger knowing and to that divine feminine consciousness and that mother knowing, right? Whereas that deep, held by lineage, held by generation before generation before generation. That's part of what the grandmother offers us. And it doesn't always have to be some massive, profound way, right? It's more just, what do you need right now? And what can you observe right now? What needs to be shown to you right now? Part of what they do, the drops in general, is they open your eyes to, and your heart, right? And your ears, your knowing, to what you otherwise wouldn't see, hear, or perceive. So it's like, here we have this quantum field with so much possibility and so much knowledge of all time, past, present, future, of probably many universes. And we can access that more easily because we've been so conditioned to tamp down that kind of knowing. These drops give us that access to the quantum in a way that we otherwise really might struggle to access. The grandfather is more in general. And I want to say these are just what we've observed, but it is absolutely not, right? Ayahuasca is not a feminine plant and San Pedro is not necessarily a masculine plant. You can get all kinds of things from any of these plants, but these are just some examples just so people have like context. So the grandfather is like a lot about heart medicine. It could be very much about the father wound. It's bringing that kind of wise grandfather energy because the San Pedro cactus, when it grows not in my home, but in its own environment, San Pedro can grow 20 feet tall. And it's just not the cactus that has, the different little arms or anything. It's just like straight up and down. So it's considered to be like a way to combine the divine and the earthly, right? So there's that heart medicine, very heart opening, very loving, very gentle most of the time. And so there's a lot around the masculine wound for men, but also for women that really be healed and bringing that like grandfather lineage energy and the strength of that, which is a different strength than the grandmother energy, which is also very strong. So that is sort of just a little bit. And when people get quantum drops, they get a guide to go with it that writes all this out so they can like, look at it. And then the children is a playful energy. And, there's inner child work there. There's communal work, right? It has that mycelial kind of energy, connecting and creating and building community and connection and finding what nourishes you. But, I'll just give an example of someone actually from our community, a doctor from our community who was taking the children and he was interviewing me for something. And so I got on the interview and he said, before we start, I just need to tell you, like, I've been dancing every day. And I was like, oh, like cute. And he's like, no, you don't understand. I like wake up in the morning. I don't get dressed. I don't get in the shower. I don't drink my coffee. I just turn on music and I start dancing. And I was like, that's crazy. And he said, I didn't know why, but then I realized I've been taking the children and it all started when I started the children, that I started to dance every day.
That's so cool. I get that. I totally get that because I feel like when we were talking before, when I take the children, I feel like it brings more playfulness, more joy. It's uplifting. The grandfather for me is more soothing and calming and stabilizing. And the grandmother for me, like, is more like strength. Like when I need to step up or step more into myself. So it's so interesting how everybody has that. That's such a cool story. I love that.
Yeah. And just like with, right, these master plants in big doses, you can't exactly predict what kind of journey you're going to have, right? It could be, and what you might be shown. And you could go in with whatever intentions and prepare and ideas. And then, what the experience is about and what you go through and what you're shown or not could have nothing to do with what you wanted or thought it was going to be. And so, I trust very deeply these drops because they are beings. In my mind, they are transmissions. They're wisdom transmissions from very powerful master plants. And, they're more gentle, but they're also very impactful in their particular way to show you and offer you what you may need in that moment. So that's part of, right? Surrender is a lesson we all need, master plants or no, right? We are not taught anything about what the value of surrender is. We are taught about the value of control, planning, and checklists and goals and right, all of that. And surrender is kind of losing. It's considered to like you screwed up, you failed. And, that's not actually the case. Surrender in the right context is very much about letting your life be shown to you and understanding that you actually don't have to be in control of everything. You are not, and you don't have to be. to live a good life and a meaningful life. In fact, it's a co-creation. And it means sometimes you're doing and sometimes you're listening. And that's what I think master plants really help with. And I think quantum drops do it in a way that anybody can experience. So like I've had moms, I've had people who are going through menopause and perimenopause, hand raised right now.
Me too. Not fun.
Who are getting help, right, with this transition into a new identity and what that means, or rebooting the identity, because of course, we're always shifting, we're always changing, and we need to kind of be integrating all the time, but also, a person with their spouse or a person with a parent, or I've had autistic children with their parents all take it together, and it helps them actually come to some like shared vibration and understanding. Obviously it doesn't have to be just children with autism, but it's been just very beautiful to see how they work for families and for couples, right? It's not just about, to your point, right, about the village. It's not just about doing this alone. It's about understanding that we're not alone, that we're all connected, and that this idea that we are each individuals with, responsible only for ourselves is totally an illusion that is causing us so much profound suffering that's really unnecessary. And so there is this beautiful ceremonial way that we can check in using these drops and coming back to ourselves and that sense of connection, which I don't think is unique to now. I think this kind of loneliness, I call it existential loneliness, that feeling of not being guided, not being connected to something bigger, and not feeling like we're all one being, right? That's something that we've forgotten since the beginning of time again and again. And that's where ritual and ceremony and master plants and all of these ways that we metabolize the ups and downs of life together, that's where we have that kind of remembering.
I love that. That's such a good way to, consider it and frame it, because I think the drops are really helpful in bringing all of that to the forefront and connecting. They do. They really help you, whether it's you yourself connecting to something higher, something bigger, the collective consciousness, or you trying to connect to your family, your loved ones. I think they really do help facilitate that in a huge way. I actually am certified in several different trauma healing modalities, and most of them are on the quantum and subconscious level. And I find that when I do my own work and I use the drops, it just gives me a little bit more, it just opens the gate a little bit more to receiving. And even my ability to, kind of project out, whatever it is, love, gratitude, whatever I'm trying to do, it helps that much more. They're absolutely phenomenal. So let me ask you, if they're, a mom listening who, is intrigued by this, because sometimes this type of stuff is very intriguing, but can also be intimidating. How would you tell her to maybe start using these if she's interested? How would you tell her to start engaging with them?
So what I would say is these are sold as a set. And so you don't have to decide which one you want. And what we found is that whatever someone is drawn to, it's almost always going to evolve. And what I've also discovered over time is that mixing them is very safe and sweet and very beneficial. I was very surprised, actually. Initially, I was like, do not mix these, only. And then I thought people are going to mix these and I'm going to, meaning take them at the same time. And I need to know what that is like so that I can advise people, warn people, etc. And it ended up being so surprisingly lovely that I actually say, for many people, it's fine and appropriate if they feel drawn to do that. But for a person just starting, what I would say is the first thing you do with them is you put them in a beautiful place. Right? These are vibrational medicine. And so being next to a plant or an altar space, if you have that, or a crystal that you love, that's actually a very, I think, important part of the process. And then going to that place and taking could be whichever one you feel drawn to. Some people like to work with just one for a week or 2 weeks, and then the next, and then the next, or you can kind of switch it up. It's totally up to you. But you just take a little squirt in your mouth and do your day, do your life. But that moment of time in the beautiful spot where these quantum drops are living. It doesn't mean you can't put them in your purse and take them places. I do. I totally do. But it's nice, especially when you're first starting. And then you just, you may want to be in conversation in the moment that you're taking the drops for what you might be calling in, but you don't have to. Because like I said, these are transmitting this ancient wisdom. They know more than we know, right? So it's really simple. You don't get high. You don't get altered in a way of, some people feel a little like euphoric or like light. Some people might feel a little tired. You can experiment with it, but for the most part, you do life as you would do life, but it's sort of like the way I talk about them is it's bringing the extraordinary into the ordinary.
Oh, 100%. And it's interesting. I feel like when I first started using them, I was almost afraid. It's like, the honoring of them. But like, as you said, like, as you get more comfortable with them and understand them and how they work, it's like, so I did use them just like you said. I would just pop them and then go. And then I tried doing them like right before I would go to sleep, when you're kind of in that twilight state and, your brainwaves are starting to change and you can, kind of access a little bit more, I'd try them then. And then, like I said, I would try them also before doing, some emotional work or trauma work, stuff like that on myself. I even do it sometimes before I go into a trauma session with somebody else, so I can bring that energy to the session. So yeah, they are absolutely phenomenal. And so, oh God, I love them because, I live in Colorado and, all the things are popular here. And, I feel like for a while there were groups and especially kind of like in the Boulder area where they were holding all of these ceremonies. We'll call them ceremonies in quotation marks because I feel like they were really doing kind of the plant and the ceremony a disservice because it was kind of like one of those, just trying to pump people through and they weren't honoring the process or the people or, anything. So I was so excited when you did this because it is very approachable and it's super simple and it's so profound what you can get from it. And it also takes away, anyone's perceived stigmas of all of these things too. Although, I mean, you and I both know that psychedelics really can be very transformative for people. There's countless studies on that in and of themselves. But, in this form, it's very approachable and, it's so user friendly and you can get so much benefit from them. So I love that you're doing these. So another question I wanted to ask you was in your own family. Obviously, you take these frequently. How has it impacted your motherhood journey and like your relationship with your kids now? And has it affected, kind of the energy in your household at all?
Well, definitely in a number of ways. So my kids are now college and beyond, and it's a whole different kind of parenting. But it is no less parenting. And, I just got a text from my daughter, did an interview today. She's 24, right? Like we're still in it. We're still in the things and, emerging into the world. I don't know if it was ever easy, but it certainly is not easy now in these days. And having kind of, come through the pandemic and had that weird real collective sideways that was. So I would say a few things. I would say for one thing, it helps me remember my own center and find my own kind of intuition in a way. I'm a very intuitive person in general, but we all, no matter how intuitive we are, no matter how guided we feel, no matter what spiritual practice we have, we're still living in this material world. We're still moms. We still have that feeling of being buffeted. We still worry how we're going to pay for this tuition or, what's going on with my kid? Are they going to be fine? All of that stuff. So for me, one way they have supported me as a mother is kind of staying in touch with that joy when, my kids are going through a really rough time and they really need my support and I could really get sucked into that. And instead I'm able to kind of have that, I'm there for them. And I also am like, have a seat in the audience and I can watch myself and I can watch them and kind of have that bigger picture and that perspective. So that's really huge because I think that has saved me a lot of suffering that would have been needless. So that's one way. Another way is obviously I can support my children using the drops as they're going through big transitions like going off to college or, my daughter graduating and moving across the country and new job, new city, new roommate, all of the things. So like that was a really hard transition. And, she had that kind of support and that was really special for her. And then it's also like that idea of being in a similar vibration. So like it's something that we can all kind of do together and engage, right? For me, it's like when you take quantum drops, you are engaging in a relationship with these masters. So it's like being in that relationship. And then also it sort of brings us all together. And it sounds kind of, we're not like sitting and like all doing our quantum drop. That's how it is. This does not happen that way. I promise you. Our house is just like a regular house. I probably have a couple more altar spaces than the average person, but beyond that, but it's just being able to have that kind of support. And that just makes, I think, all of us feel a little less buffeted. And my kids, like, I need my, no, they're young adults. They definitely, both love me and think I'm crazy. Like, it's all good. But you know what? They still come to me. And they still need the wisdom. They still want to know what I think will help them with X, Y, or Z. And it's like a beautiful support.
I love that because that's how I kind of view the process of using them too. Yeah, because my kiddos are little. I waited forever to have mine. 6.5 and 11. So we're going through some of the stuff that you guys encountered earlier because my son he's ADHD and, he's my little Aquarius. So he is a force to be reckoned with when he's in full bloom, as I like to say. But they can be really helpful just to like bring them back into the moment, right? And calm them down. And kids, it's really funny. I notice now that he's in probably the last 6 months, he turned 11 in February. And he has big, big emotions and big ideas. And I know especially even if I'm the one taking the drops and not even him, I can change the energy of the interaction and I can change the energy that's in the house by, what's happening. And I'll just tell him like, buddy, just take a minute, take a breath and then recenter yourself. And then all of the, kind of the chaos goes away. And they're such a useful, valuable, tool for moms to have. And it's funny that you kind of said, my house isn't crazy. I mean, I have them on my desk. I kind of oscillate between keeping them on my desk and up on my nightstand. But that when they're on my desk, they're right next to a pretty little plant and little palm. And like I have some rhodochrosite right here that I keep near. I've got a bunch of, my different crystals. I've got, a lot of stuff near them, but it's interesting. Like you said, like sometimes I'll just walk by, grab it, take it, and then be done, and then other times I'm much more intentional about it. And there is, I have an intended effect that I want from that interaction. So it's like, I think a lot of times stuff like this seems, like I said, like intimidating or scary, and it really doesn't have to be. It's super simple, but it can be so helpful and so valuable. So last thing, I just wanted to, because of all of the, experience you've had and the training and the wisdom, what do you think that, the wise kind of elders would tell us moms now who are struggling, to navigate life in this day and age? What kind of advice do you think that they would give us on, kind of utilizing nature and plant medicine to help, just with life and healing of the wounds and just getting through day to day?
Well, gosh, like it's a big order to speak on behalf of the elders.
I'd say if anyone knows, you probably know more than most of us from your interactions.
Well, I want to say something actually, if you don't mind, first about what you said about your son, because obviously as a trained adult and pediatric neurologist, and especially one who focused on pediatric neurology for many, 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 many years, one of the things about quantum drops is that they help people, and particularly anyone who's neurodivergent. And I could talk about neurodivergence for a very long time. Maybe we'll have another conversation sometime about that, because I'd love to blow up that idea. But one of the things we know about people who are neurodivergent is, and that's adults through kids, right? Anyone in that spectrum, and people who are gifted, and very often those things overlap, right? Is that they have wider sensory gating. And sensory gating is actually it's clinical. It's something that happens in the cell. Literally, we have auditory sensory gating. And the way I describe it is imagine someone saying your name across a crowded room, right? Like your auditory sensory gating is going to open very widely so that you're going to kind of focus very much on what that person is going to say next, right? So we can modulate that in a number of ways, but it also describes our perception, our windows of perception. And so part of what I've seen quantum drops do, whereas large doses of psychedelics, right, blast open the sensory gating, quantum drops help people to modulate it, which means not just to open it, but also potentially when needed to close it. So I think they offer this sort of protective capacity. They engage our agency and children's agency around being able to kind of narrow that or widen that as appropriate. So that's what I wanted to say about that, because I think it's so important. And obviously all of the neurodivergent kiddos out there and adults are very near and dear to my heart. So that's part of like my kind of happy mission around offering this. In terms of the wisdom, I would just say that it's really deeply about making connection and having micro communities and not trying to do things alone. And those communities are made up not just of people. They're made up of animals. They're made up of plants. They're made up of water and wind and sunshine and all of the beings that are out there, microbes. I mean, you name it, but it's like everything, every way that we're engaging is what's making us every moment. And having a relationship, right? The way that I learned what health is from my teachers, my indigenous teachers, was being in right relationship, right? Being in good spiritual health. All the other stuff is downstream, mental health, physical health, etc. Trauma, everything downstream from spiritual health. And spiritual health is being in right relationship with yourself, with other people, with the land and the beings on the land, with ancestors and with the invisible. So that is what I would say. It sounds big and hard, but in fact, it actually is not at all. It's just being mindful and making those connections and spending time in nature and talking to people and, right, like building these circles.
Yeah, I actually did a podcast interview 2 weeks ago, and that's exactly what we were talking about, like how integral community of all types is to our, not only our health and well-being, but our survival. It's ingrained in us, and it's, or to humans, we need community, and increasingly we've been isolated, especially post-pandemic, pandemic and post-pandemic. There was a shift, and that was for me in the last calendar year. It was like all about community and reaching out to people and, even, especially getting more involved in my community here because we moved during the pandemic. So it was interesting. So I didn't really know that many people around. So just getting out into the community and, just connecting with everybody. And also the surrender piece. You had mentioned surrender. And that was like, I did a surrender experiment in November and December where because I feel like you said, it's always that energy of drive and control. And I decided, and I'm guilty of that my whole life, like push. And I was like, I'm just going to sit back and let things happen. And I actually had some amazing things happen during that while I was mindful. I was just open. I was open to receiving what came to me rather than, a mental agenda. So yeah, there's so much that we can do to, just make our lives a little bit easier when we do these things, when we connect and when we tap into some of these, amazing things that we have at our fingertips, like the quantum drops. So I'm super, super excited that you were here and you shared all of this amazing knowledge with us because, like I said before, I really feel like this is something important for the world to hear and the world to hear right now because of, the place that we're in. Thank you so, so much, Maya.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And it's always such a pleasure to get to chat and, just share about the things that we're all going through and being real about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because life isn't easy. I know social media might make it look like that many times, but it's not. We all know. Oh, well, thanks again. And yeah, maybe we can have that conversation about neurodivergence because I would love that because I've been reading some interesting stuff about it lately, just different philosophies and different changes. And so that would be another great thing because I know a lot of the moms I work with, they themselves they're dealing with that or a bunch of them dealing with it with their kiddos. So that would be another great conversation. Alrighty. Thank you so much, Maya. If you made it this far, I truly appreciate you. Remember, knowledge is just the beginning. Taking action is what truly sparks change. If you're overwhelmed and don't have enough energy to make it through the day, I invite you to book a free 20-minute coaching call with me. It's a no-obligation chat where we can discuss your health goals and how I might be able to help you achieve them. Visit the link in the episode description to book that call. Until next time, keep striving for wellness and remember, you have the power to not just survive, but thrive in motherhood.